Is the Vancouver market crazier than the Toronto market? Well, that's what we're going to talk about right after the intro with my good friend Roland Kym. Stay tuned.
Well, my friends, as promised, here's Roland Kym all the way from Vancouver. My man, how are you?
Good, Gary. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. So we are starting to feel that spring where we've got buds and the leaves are opening up. The apple blossoms are coming. I know that's already happened in the Vancouver area, but how's the market looking? What's going on out there, my friend? You know, we're in the last weekend of April here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're going to hit the high 20s this weekend. And I think yesterday it was raining and 8 degrees, so completely different. Real estate continues to trend busier. I mean, when we spoke last, the the April numbers were certainly looking like we were catching up in sales volume, and that is continuing. And so it's a busy spring market.
Well, it's interesting. Our April numbers, and for our brokerage here, we're actually outpacing the local, we call it Toronto real estate market, in number of new listings. We're adding new listings continually every week. Are you starting to have more and more of those conversations with you and your agents out there?
Yeah, and we're seeing less relists, right? A lot of
Yeah.
the new listings that we were seeing in November, December, January, February were, not brand new listings to the market, and even so much so that some realtors on their listing descriptions are saying, brand new to market, so the consumer realizes it's not a realist, and we're seeing less and less of the realists. So I think I'm trending. I think by June we'll have a busier volume of sales in Vancouver year over year than last year. Mind you, it
Yeah.
was slowing down in June, but it's going to be a busy second half of the year.
Excellent. Excellent. No, that's good. So we just wrapped up a video with one of my favorite mortgage brokers here in Ontario. And we were talking about the affordability and how can first-time home buyers get into the market in the GTA area. And you could probably have the carbon copy conversation with the Vancouver market. And I'm sure you do on many occasions. I'm going to ask you a kind of a loaded question perhaps, but what makes or why is that Vancouver market so expensive these days?
Yeah, I would bring it back to like not the Olympics, the 86 what is that?
Expo. Yeah.
Expo.
Yeah.
And building up into that, where I think Vancouver was just at its early youth and advertising to the world as a great place to live and build business and life. And then Expo was such a huge success that I think from that point forward, the migration to Canada and especially Vancouver just started to blossom and continue to grow. And 20 years later, combined with we have mountains on kind of all sides other than where the oceans are. And the biggest problem is our view of how we build. And so we built really slowly. And so we're just so far behind. And what I mean by that is, we probably have 15 to 20 years of, missing every year 10 to 15% of the inventory that we needed to be balanced, that we're now in a market there's just a shortage of housing for the number of people that want to move here. And, we got Whistler 2 hours to the north of us. We have, the states below us. So we have the pressure from Silicon Valley, now Seattle Silicon style, and Vancouver itself is being focused as a tech, center. You got the lifestyle, you got tourism, and with Canada's vision of migration over the next few years increasing dramatically, we, as well as Toronto, gets the affluent migrants, and so it just keeps putting pressure on housing.
I can see that, and it truly has become a world-renowned city. Especially, most recently, we'll talk about the Olympics back.
Yeah.
What was that? It was 2010, wasn't it?
Yeah,
but it's
awesome.
still like people still talk and remember about it. I remember everything about it. It has become not more than just a destination city. It's where people want to live, invest, grow. And you mentioned something important there: the lifestyle.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me, I grew up in Pemberton and spent a lot of time
Sure.
in Whistler. And so in the 80s, when we immigrated there, and I grew up, in the 90s and then graduated in the late 90s, I had a lot of friends who didn't appreciate what Whistler or Pemberton offered. And so you kind of, if you stuck around and you started a family, you just assumed that you were going to buy a house and I guess live a lifestyle. And Vancouver's similar in that way, where a lot of people didn't know what they had. And so kind of the market grew around them and in many ways grew above what they were comfortable paying. And so now if you look back in Pemberton, in the 86, you could buy 300 acres for 200,000. And now 10 acres is, over a million too. And it's just a lifestyle play. And there's enough people that love that. And the same thing in Vancouver, there's enough people that love the lifestyle it offers that, the locals kind of, many of them got kind of, put to sleep in thinking that the market would be level for a long time, which it just changed in the last decade,
Yeah,
2 decades.
interesting. Well, sounds like a terrible place to grow up in the 90s.
Yeah.
That's actually, I did segue here. That's what I did most of my skiing in Whistler and down in Mount Baker in Washington was in that early 90s. Man, I got fond memories of those days. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, living what I think the most was 14 people in a house in Emerald in Whistler. I had
Nice.
2 roommates in a room. Crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the days. We're playing history here, but that's okay. The days of I must have been early '90s, going to Mount Baker, Canadian money at par for $17 lift tickets. Like you can't buy a coffee for that nowadays.
Crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously we've got inflation. We've got
Yeah.
everything that's going on with the Canadian economy. We've got also the Vancouver market moving as fast as it does. And the lack of inventory, the number of people moving there. We talked about this on the last video as well. But let's look at it from perhaps a bigger picture. Our parents, for instance, they can retire. Most parents, in their 70s and 65 and older, we'll say, maybe a little bit younger. They can retire really on their real estate. The home that they lived in, that home that they've had for 30, 40, 50 years. They can retire
Yes.
on how valuable that is. But as we look to help guide, say, the younger generation,
Yes.
that's a different story, wouldn't you say?
It definitely is. And it's interesting when I speak with those types of clients, and if they, reflect back, most of them, when they signed the mortgage 40 years ago, their statement to the partner was, I just hope it's not worth less when we pay it off.
Yeah.
There was never this idea that it was going to like double, let alone, I mean, there's parts of BC where if you bought a house 40 years ago, it like doubled 25 times, in 40 years, in 30 years. And pretty much every property I've seen has doubled at least 4 or 5 times. And so you're totally right that a lot of people stumbled into kind of the retirement wealth. And that, real estate is magical, continues to be magical for the simple fact that you're putting very little down and you're having the growth of 100% of the value. But we have to approach it a bit different. Like we're not going to get triples in our lifetime, in my opinion, unless very select product or you build the exit. But so I think it's hopefully I'm teaching people around me to really get into the practice of saving, because I do feel that we have to put money into real estate, but also other ways of preserving your wealth and growing your wealth. And there's opportunity there because, like I have a lot of tenants in Vancouver that make 6 figures, and I tell them you can buy this apartment that you live in. And they're like, well, don't really want to yet, I will in the future. And so maybe the scary part is a lot of, I think, younger people are making more money in their early years and living a far more, like maybe not even luxurious, but certainly luxurious, but more worldly lifestyle. Like I remember the first time I went to an all-inclusive in Mexico, I was in my late 20s, and I have tenants that are in their teens, spending all that kind of money. So I think it's a story about saving. And where I think our story was about, at our age, was about making more. I think now it's like, how can you invest more and live off less?
Yeah, no, those are great points, and I think that's a great mantra to be teaching people is real estate is one way to create wealth, but also there's a balance of enjoying life along the way, and we see a lot of that younger generation wanting that more. On the flip side, though, there's value and power in being able to create your future by
Yes.
investing in real estate or using real estate to invest in other things, which I know you do, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in future videos. But being able to balance that portfolio a little bit, and I think, Roland, would you agree? You know, whether you're in Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, educating yourself with what's going on in that real estate market. Of course, primarily we're real estate focused. Just understanding what's going on and always having ear to ground for the right opportunity or opportunities as they appear. Yes.
100%. There's always opportunities, and I always try and make people understand. In my opinion, you really have 3 decades to do everything, right? So if you think of most young adults now, they're not on their on their path until they're probably 25, where they're starting to earn some significant money. And everyone has the vision of like hopefully pulling back a little bit by 55, 60. So the gap, between 25 and 55 is only 3 decades. And so you really have 3 decades to put your roots down in your investment world so they can start growing, raise your family, pay for the family, and then try and figure out a way of paying for retirement. And I am meeting more and more people that don't see that 3-decade growth window. It's like, I'm a farm boy. I grew up on a farm. So for me, it's springtime, right? You gotta put all the work in at springtime, and then you gotta cultivate it throughout the summer. But if you don't put in the work at the springtime, you can't catch up. And that's kind of like, I feel that's a failed message that no one's hearing, that, although humans, hopefully, I don't know what the average lifeline is, but let's say it's 85 years, you really only have 30 years to grow grow and preserve your wealth.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So our current Vancouver market, as we kind of sign off here, lack of inventory. So let's get that inventory up there, right? Talking to your sellers, talking to your clients about the possibility of when there's a lack of inventory there, that means there's a greater opportunity as a seller, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And as a buyer, the opportunity, I think, is re-looking at a lot of listings. We certainly have the Amazon effect right now where, you want it just in time. So something new and hot is exciting. And there's, in my opinion, I've put a lot of deals together in the last few weeks of looking at the listings that are dated, 30, 40, 50 days on market, finding out if they've been sold. And we found a few gems there. And so that is kind of a technique that buyers can still use.
Yeah, I like that. And we often, we want to look at the newest inventory, right? We want to look to see what's new. I think as realtors and as buyers, train our clients to look, hey, what's still sitting out there? Because that means that both people have said no. A buyer has said no, or the seller has said no, not at that price. Right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point you bring up, right? Because if the seller had said, that they wanted, essentially a seller when they list a property, is either going to sell it or buy it back. And they're going to decide, I don't want to go lower. I'm going to keep it off market and essentially buy it back. And if they're on the market, they're indicating they don't want to buy it back. They still want to do a deal. And so that's where the great deals are made if you're a buyer.
Yeah, there you go. And I took a client to go see a property yesterday. It's being sold, through the word escapes me all of a sudden, a power of attorney. And there's a whole thing there with where the property has to be on the market for 8 days, and there's a lot of moving parts to it before any offers are accepted. All sorts of crazy stuff. However, the interesting thing is, the more complicated some of those listings get, people will tend to walk away.
Yeah.
Right. And we often say it's kind of similar with a power sale property, at least in our area. You never want to be the first or second or third offer because the bank has to say no to a handful of offers first, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, my friends. So there's lots going on. I think both of our markets at this current moment are like mirror images of each other. Man, do we need inventory here in Toronto. I know you need inventory there to help the buyers and just to soften that market a little bit. But at the end of the day, as you said, there's always opportunity. How do people get a hold of you?
Real simple. Just Google me online, Roland Kym, Kym with KYM. And otherwise, my cell number is 604-970-0393.
There you have it, my friends. So for Roland, I'm Gary, and we'll see everybody on the next video. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye. Thanks, Gary.